All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Thursday Think Tank series presented by YRCI University. My name is Sharita Heath, and I will be presenting on smart planning for workforce reshaping. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will get them at the end of the webinar. Also, we will send you a recording of the webinar via email afterwards. I am Shrita Heath, and I currently support YRCI University as a Senior Training Specialist SME, subject matter expert in federal human capital. I have worked in the federal space for around a decade and have been both a federal employee as well as a contractor. I completed my undergraduate education and graduate education at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, where I currently reside, and this is home for me as well. Right now, focusing a lot on different types of training, delegated examining, classification, general staffing. We have all of those in-house here at YRCI. So, objectives for today. By the end of this session, what we want you to be able to take away. Some of the key phrases of risk planning. All right. So, what are some of those button words? Also, exploring considerations for workforce reshaping. So, for the most part, that's what all of this is. Reduction in force, RIF, is a form of workforce reshaping. So let's look at some of the strategies that align with that. Also, preparing necessary documentation and communication plans. We're going to find out communication is key. You can never over communicate, and also being proactive with getting that documentation in from your employees, as well as putting documentation out to your employees, is going to be essential. And also aligning the HR actions with the mission. So your 201s, which are the Federal Human Resources Specialists, the actions that they're performing, do they align with the mission? So they're the ones doing the administrative part of the workforce reshaping, making sure both of those line up. Our agenda for today, we're going to look at why risk planning matters. We're going to look at the legal framework, what CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, what CFR covers reduction in force. Also, we're going to look at some strategies. So pre-RIF, what are some considerations? What are your options? We're going to look at a couple different roles as far as HR and leadership are concerned, and then also how we can help. And then we're going to finish up with Q&A, wrap up, and share some resources we have. But before we get into the thick of it, let's get started with the poll. It should pop up on your screen, and it says, have you ever supported an agency going through a RIF? Once again, RIF is reduction in force. It's a layoff or a furlough. All right. And those answers should pop in any moment. So let's go ahead and get started. Why planning matters? So it's not just RIF planning, it is workforce reshaping planning. Once again, remembering that these are not just administrative events. These events affect your entire staff, and it affects people outside of your staff. So it can affect contractors, it can affect private citizens, it can affect a lot of different areas of not only the federal space, but the public. And they are disruptive. So workforce reshaping, reduction in force, they're disruptive to the organization. Whether they are beneficial or not is still something that changes. It changes how things are. And a lot of times we are creatures of comfort and we are anti-change, but with planning, you can help mitigate some of that. Also, the legal risk that comes with reduction in force. Reductions in force are highly regulated through the Office of Personnel Management, also known as OPM. So there can be legal challenges when it comes to implementing these reductions in force. Also, you want to protect the morale of your staff. They may see their friends are leaving, leadership may be leaving, different things are happening in their homes. Friends are calling, asking, like, hey, I just heard this about your agency. Are you okay? So we want to protect that morale if we can, give our employees or give the employees a soft landing, and also preserving that mission. So the mission is going to be evolving, but making sure that we preserve the key elements of it and deliver it effectively to the American people. And also knowing that our budgets are tightening. The budgets of the federal government, not our budgets, the federal budgets are tightening. Sorry about that. The missions are shifting, they're evolving. So if you're proactive with the planning, you can kind of see, okay, I can take away from here and I can redistribute this here. So proactive planning is key. So some of the legal framework surrounding reduction in force. So what is a reduction in force? So on the private side, it's a layoff, it's a furlough. On the federal side, it's a reduction in force. Once again, it is governed by the Office of Personnel Management. And its foundation is in the 5 CFR Part 351. So CFR, those are the Code of Federal Regulations. And we put the link here, ecfr.gov. That's where you can go and research these different regulations. So that's where reduction in force is housed. Also, reduction in force, we're looking at 4 different factors when we're determining who may end up impacted by this furlough or this layoff. So we have a retention register that we're going to create. It's like a matrix, could look like an Excel spreadsheet. And for the most part, you're going to list all of your employees, everyone who's on your rolls. And you're going to look at 4 different factors. You're going to look at their tenure, which is whether they're a career employee, career conditional, temporary, or a temporary. Actually, the bottom 2 levels kind of don't make it into here, but yeah, you're going to look at your career employees. And then we have veterans preference. So are you a non-veteran? Are you a TP or 5-point veteran? Do you have a disability rating? Making sure you have those DD-214s and those letters from the VA in so we can adjudicate that properly, because that's going to be the second factor. And these are chronological. So first we look at your tenure, then we look at your veterans preference, then we look at your length of creditable service. So how much time have you accumulated working in the federal sector? So putting all that together. We need your SF50s. We need documentation for that so we can put all those numbers together. And then performance ratings. So you are going to be rated on your performance every year. A lot of people may not have taken performance ratings very seriously. Now is the time, and now hindsight can be 2020. Performance ratings are going to be that 4th factor. This is going to determine where you fall on that retention register in that matrix. You want to be closer to the top if you want to stay with that agency or have a better chance of staying with that agency. All 4 of these factors are going to play a part. Quick tip we have here, always verify EOPFs, which are electronic official personnel files, well in advance of any RIF planning. And you're going to need that for all these factors. It's going to help me determine your tenure group through your SF50s, your veterans preference through your letters from the VA and your DD-214s. Your length of service is also coming from your SF50s. And then your performance records or performance ratings are going to be in your EOPF as well. So some of the strategic considerations surrounding RIF or reduction in force. Is RIF the only option? It is not. It actually should be one of your last options. What you want to do initially is start with the voluntary options. So we have VERA, which is the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority. And then we have VSIP, which is the Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment. Also, hiring freeze. Right now, we are in a federally mandated hiring freeze, but that is another option outside of RIF, which is laying off your employees, to where you're saying, like, hey, let's look at who we have on the rolls. Let's see what we can do here before we bring new people in. And then you also have attrition and reassignments. Then the position mapping, we're looking at our org charts. Who is where? What are they doing? We have to look at their PDs, and we're looking at that physical diagram of where folks are currently placed. Can we consolidate? Can we reorganize entire departments and make it more efficient, make it more lean? All right. And then funding streams. So budgets are getting tight. Some departments may be eliminated altogether. Do they align with the mission priorities? Can we put folks in other places so they can stay employed? Or might we have to eliminate those positions altogether? And also looking at anticipated skill gaps. So when folks are allowed to leave, or when it's kind of encouraged for the staff to maybe look at some of the voluntary options, assuming they're a position that may be up for elimination, there may be skill gaps there. You're losing experience. Whether or not the person performed well or not, they still added something to that agency and they brought a level of experience with them. So, anticipating those impacts on what your mission delivery looks like. All right. And so, there are a couple roles here that we're going to discuss. So, we're going to start with HR, human resources. They are ultimately responsible for maintaining the updated records. So, they create the records, they receive records from the employees that are on the rolls. And these include your SF50s, which we talked about. That's going to help with the tenure. That's going to help with your length of creditable service. Your performance ratings, that's that fourth factor, right? So we need those documents. They should be uploaded and signed to the EOPF. And then your veterans documentation. You may have a statement of service, a DD 214, or a letter from the VA. We have to make sure all of those documents are updated and uploaded into EOPF. Also, building and testing the retention registers. You need to run mock scenarios of what this actually looks like if it were to be implemented. Just knowing that it's a very dynamic document and it's going to change, it's going to evolve, but you need to build it, test it, see if it works, see how it works, see where there might be some gaps, see where there's room for improvement. Also, advising leadership. HR has to let leadership know, hey, this is going to be the new org chart once we implement this RIF. Once this retention register is good to go and we know that these folks are going to be gone, this is what this looks like. But what other options are there? Did we exhaust VERA? Did we exhaust VSIP? Did we look at reassignments and transfers? So making sure they have all their options so they can make an informed decision. Also developing communication plans. That goes both ways. So you're going to want to talk to the employees that may be impacted, as well as the ones that are staying on the rolls, because technically everyone is impacted. If there are less staff on the rolls, that may mean that I have to pick up extra, assuming I'm one of the ones that stays, I may have to pick up extra duties and responsibilities. So everyone is impacted. But you definitely want to let the employees know that are going to be furloughed or laid off. You have to communicate. You cannot over communicate. And there are rules and regulations regarding that communication as well. And then knowing that this process is not siloed, HR is not going to be the only one working with workforce reshaping and reduction in force. You have the legal department that's going to look at any type of reconsiderations or requests that come from the employees that may be affected. You have the unions. So those collective bargaining agreements that were already in place, those are usually pretty airtight. But reduction in force supersedes that. But some of the unions may actually push back, have to have those open lines of communication. EAP, employee assistance programs. This can be a tumultuous time for everyone. So not just people being furloughed, but the people staying on the rolls, making sure they know about those employee assistance programs. And then we have OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, and then OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, when it comes to the VSIP option, because they have to check your budget line items to make sure you have enough money to offer those voluntary separation incentive payments. Quick tip here, begin retention register reviews at least 6 months in advance when possible. All right, leadership's role in planning. I won't go too far into this one because actually next week's Thursday Think Tank, we're going to talk about leadership's role. But just knowing that the leaders are expected to provide clear guidance. Once again, you cannot over communicate, and being transparent is key. It's going to make sure or ensure that your staff trust you and they find you credible. Also, leaders need to encourage early engagement. Don't let the folks on your roll be reactive once they receive a notice stating that they're going to be separated. Everyone can go ahead and get started talking to HR. Hey, what are my options? Am I eligible to retire? You know, is there a legal process I can go through if I think something doesn't look quite right? They said that I'm at the bottom of this list, but I know for sure I should be higher, or at least I think I should be higher. And then finance. It's going to have a financial impact on everyone. You may have to take a change to lower grade, or you may be separated altogether. What does that planning look like? And then avoiding reactive decision making. You want to be proactive, if at all possible, by planning early. All right, a few FAQs about workforce reshaping. What are some early indicators that RIF may be on the horizon? Workforce reshaping. Once again, reduction in force is a part of workforce reshaping. It doesn't have to be, but it is. So when budgets get tighter, we may have to let people go. When the mission has changed, we may need to reduce our workforce or at least reshape it. Also, how far in advance should HR begin preparing the retention register? Talked about that on the previous slide, at least 6 months. The earlier, the better. Common pitfalls agencies make: under communication and not being transparent. Your staff will appreciate you and they will trust you if you keep open lines of communication and you are transparent about what's going on with the agency. Because you're not just affecting their careers, you're affecting their lives. And once again, it's kind of like a domino effect. So you start here, you have your federal staff, then you have your contractors, and then you have the American public. So it really affects everyone. And then how can VERA and VSIP help avoid RIF? So those are voluntary options. We want to start with voluntary, low impact options. If you put the ball in my court, let's say I was the federal employee, you give me these options saying, hey, you're eligible for this, or you're eligible for this. This is a voluntary option where I'm able to kind of drive this boat and determine where I go next. And how can we help? So at YRCI, we have over 20 years of experience in human capital. So I won't read all these bullets here. You can see it here. And we're going to also give you a little bit more information about how you can reach out to us if you have questions or if you want to know more. But we do have that human capital expertise. We do have advisory services, so we can help you with different scenarios, different HR policy and compliance, et cetera. And then we have tailored solutions. So where I work, YRCI University, we do tailor trainings for your agency. You could be a competitive service, accepted service. We know those look a little bit different in the federal landscape. So we do have tailored solutions for you. And wrapping up, planning is key. That's why it's in the title of this Thursday Think Tank. You have to plan before the RIF, really you should be planning before the workforce reshaping. Once you have an idea of like, hey, we're going to have to change some things around here, planning is essential. Also aligning those HR tools or those human resources tools with your intent, with your strategy. So my 201 or my human resources staff, are they giving us what we need to keep this mission going? So they're doing the administrative side. They're also doing an advisory service as well. But do those two align? What HR is doing with what the mission is. And then documentation, communication. Once again, you cannot over communicate. And documentation coming from both your staff in the form of making sure their EOPF is updated, as well as the documentation that I send out. Am I sending out official communication about this workforce reshaping, about reduction in force? Okay. And then it is not siloed. No one single element of a federal agency is going through this process by themselves. It's a group effort. We have some resources here. They are mostly from OPM, so the Office of Personnel Management, opm.gov. They have RIF guidance, they have a workforce reshaping handbook, and then veterans preference. Remember, that was that second factor on the retention register. So making sure you adjudicate those veterans correctly the first time will alleviate a lot of stress on the back end. All right, and now we have another poll for you. Want to learn more about how YRCI can help or can support RIF planning and workforce reshaping? Yes or not at this time. We also have this QR code here. We are so fancy. We have all the things. So I have a QR code above my head. We have a QR code right here on the slide, and then the poll. All of them will lead right back to us. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Sharita. That was very informative. And I want to ask you to clarify rather, we use 3 terms in this presentation: RIF, reduction in force, a furlough, and a layoff. And you stated that furloughs and layoffs are synonymous, especially layoff. I noticed that the Office of Personnel Management does use layoff. They describe it on their website. A RIF is a layoff. And I do know that furloughs can be temporary. The employee can either seek to get in private sector, they can seek another position, but their position remains, they may be called back. So to me, I think the difference is in those three terms that a RIF is an abolishment of a position for employee. A furlough is a temporary, can be a temporary removal of a person from their position, and a layoff is also considered more permanent. Does that sound accurate?
It does. So with that, I can kind of see it twofold because there can be some reorganizations that happen. I can be transferred to a different position. And technically, you could be temporarily furloughed during this process, which we have seen. If you look in the media or talk to your friends who work for the federal government, people have been temporarily furloughed and they've been brought back to their positions. So they weren't permanently separated. So you can kind of see it a lot of different ways, but I do think layoff and riff are more synonymous with each other because once you're riffed, typically you go to that priority placement list or the reemployment priority list. You're listed on CTAP, ICTAP list. So that's typically your next step, but it can be somewhat of a temporary process or action, but it really just depends on how it was submitted and finalized. But yes, I like your interpretation.
Thanks.
No, this is great, Sharita. So I do have a question, and I don't know how much of it's tied to this presentation, but in the government sector right now, we're hearing a lot of, like, even early on in the spring, where many people were offered kind of this delayed retirement. So how does that factor into, like, when you're talking about this, where does it put those individuals when they're looking at timing and then also other actions that may be happening in the organization? Does it just basically put them on leave? And it's not a furlough, it's not a RIF, and how does that kind of pull together? What do you see happening there?
Understood. So it's a couple things there. So it's deferred resignation program. So it's two. So deferred resignation program, I think is what you're talking about, where the email went out for the fork in the road, where you could determine, pretty much if you wanted to stay on the rolls or not. And I think that went out to almost everyone. And so technically, you're still on the rolls.
Mhm.
Technically, you may still have to work through part of that time, but you were going to be given an effective separation date. Initially, it was September 30, 2025.
Mhm.
So during that time period, if your agency didn't need you there, you could transfer your functions to whoever was remaining. You could go about your business. You could go get another full-time job. And then effective September 30, you would be separated from that organization. So it's a resignation. There is a deferred retirement, which it's not tied to this particular workforce reshaping. It could be an option, but deferred resignation was open to everyone. And it's a permanent action once you reach that September 30 date, and it's a
Mhm.
resignation. So you resigned. And yeah, you still receive your paycheck up until that date.
But
And
the
you can
government,
couple it with, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
no, but the government also has the ability to be able to pull those individuals back onto the rolls too, if they see
Yeah.
that as a requirement. Mhm.
Well, you're still on the roll. So
Yeah, yeah,
a lot of people thought they could just leave the next day if they selected that. It's like, oh, well, I could just go on vacation.
right,
Your
right.
agency actually has to approve it. And they could keep you up until September 30, 2025, even with the deferred resignation. So yeah, that's where you sometimes have to read the fine print to see what actually you're signing up for. But it's a workforce reshaping tool. It's alleviated the need for larger scale rifts because people voluntarily left. So it was a voluntary option along with Vera and VSIP. So yep, definitely workforce reshaping.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any more questions? If not, I want to say thank you so very much for attending this Thursday Think Tank series. Once again, we have another one, same time, and we're going to talk about leadership's role. Thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can scan any of these QR codes. Thank you again.